So continuing on from the work on the rams, I have bored these caps out to 10mm, and these will fit inside, so I'm gaining a little bit of travel with this nut. So that means that the nuts can continue beyond the end of the ram and insert its stop right up the top of the cap. I've also bored out one of these outer tubes here. I did it in the lathe this time around. I have done it by hand in the past, but I've found that it's quite a long job. I thought I'll give it a shot in the lathe. If it destroyed itself in the lathe, then I would have been back 2 steps, but I have managed to bore a 10mm hole all the way through, right the way through to the end. And I don't know whether you can see that on camera, but you can see how far it's out of round or out of centre. And this is, I've got a pretty forgiving lathe where the drill bit was unable to move the tailstock up and down to go with the flow, if you see what I mean. Had it been held rigid, the whole thing, the drill would have burst out the side, I would have thought. So that's good. I've got the added length of outer tube, so I can accommodate even more of this nut at the bottom end as well. So I should have ample movement inside this with this nut to give us the distance and the movement of the arm that I want. So and hopefully a bit to spare. If it turns out that I'm short in some way of the movement and I need to increase it, there's 2 ways of doing it. I could take a little bit off the length of this rod, but I would have to take it off the other end, because this would be glued into position and it wouldn't be practical to remove this again just to take a little bit off the length. So this is kind of like a press fit onto the end of this tube, so I could get it off if I have to. As long as I've got one of these inside the bore and clamp it in soft jaws, then start an unscrewing motion to get that cap off. Like I say, I've done it before on the other rams to finally tune it, and I've also taken a little bit off the edge of this, off the ends, just to gain a bit more at the stop ends. But I don't like doing that because we're taking thread away, which is useful as a driver. So but it's an out. I only use that as a last resort, really. So the next thing that I'll be doing is to shave down take the flange off. So this back in the lathe, centered up, take the flange off, get it all one size so that it's just a barrel, and then I'll come back and start fitting it. Alright, so just back from the lathe. That's the finished article. So you can see there, if I put the 2 side by side, that's the difference, and that's the amount of waste material that we've had to waste on that. I'm not blessed with a thread cutting facility to be able to form one of these threads for myself, so I've got to buy it as a T6 lead screw and a nut. But hey ho, you know, that's what we need to do this job. So this is all ready now to assemble, so what I will do is to put on the end cap. Then I could put a bead of adhesive around here. In this case it's going to be super glue. It seems to work well. Then I will carefully screw those two together until it bottoms in the hole. Then insert the thread right the way up the inside of that tube. Like so. Then once it's like that, I've got to think of a way of storing it, and I want to store it for about an hour hanging up that way, like that, so that it holds straight. So I'll rig something up to hold that so that it's just hanging down, and we'll leave that for about an hour, hour and a half maybe, just for the glue to initially set. Then I can unscrew this, make sure that the glue hasn't found its way into the thread, and just leave that for 24 hours, maybe 48. Give it as much time as possible to really set rock hard, and then that will be job done. Okay, so we're going to go through the procedure of putting all these bits together. So I use some of this, it's like a super glue, and I've roughed up or just gone around with a piece of 400 grit paper just to give this something to grip to. So I'm just going to run a small bead around the edge of this, very small amount, just enough to run but not to drip. I've preheated with a hot air gun the brass section, so that's quite warm to the touch. And now I'll offer these two bits together, just screw it on like that, and quickly run the thread, or the bar up the thread, and make sure that it's perfectly straight all the way up the bar. Firmly push those together. Okay, now there is a little bit of resistance on the thread, so I'll just manoeuvre that around. That's fine. I can hear it rubbing the side. I'll hold it up a minute. Perhaps you can hear that. But yeah, I mean it runs right up without any resistance. So I shall leave that for about an hour. It's got itself there, and then I shall run a second bead just around that edge, just to fill that gap, just to give it a bit more strength. Okay, that's the two of them, both of them done now, glued up. I've just left them hanging on a couple of bolts so that they're hanging vertically down, so the root weld, if you like, is done. So we've got the adhesive right down the bottom of the joint, and because it's a nice fit, the glue won't run down onto the thread, because we don't want the thread glued up at this point. So I shall let that set for about an hour, then go around again with the adhesive, and I should probably use a much finer nozzle. I should probably use one of those which fits on the top of this, and I can get a really fine bead around the side of that and allow it to run down into that joint and fill that joint right up. Then I shall leave it for about 2 days for it to cure and to set really hard, and that will be a brilliant joint.